Sí.
Better than my all four words in Turkish. You know what the four words is. I'm sure you know many languages. Not as many as I should. I'll take that. This actually is related to a class in Tübingen. There were lots of students in Tübingen. From Marmara University. They didn't hate me now, they still want to see me. Thank you for coming.
Esselamu Aleyküm. Welcome. Good evening, dear friends, guests, students, and faculty. It's a lovely evening. Welcome. The Institute for Sufi Studies gratefully presents Dr. Besnik Sinani's lecture tonight. Dr. Sinani is a dear, loyal, and kind friend of our institute. We met him in the summer of 2018 when he came for the first International Intensive Sufi Studies Summer School. 2018 summer school students and faculty became a family of seekers. Since then, we've been corresponding and following each other's works. Besnik Hoca teaches at Tübingen University in Germany. His book, titled Sufism in Saudi Arabia, this is the cover of the book, Sufism in Saudi Arabia since 1979, The Politics of Orthodoxy in Contemporary Islam, recently published by Brill, is pioneering research about this very difficult topic. Dr. Sinani's research required solid grasp of Arabic language and culture, perseverance, care, and tremendous sabr, patience. Dr. Sinani explores Sufism in Saudi Arabia since 1979, a groundbreaking journey into a rarely seen side of the Saudi kingdom's religious life. Drawing on rich fieldwork, in-depth interviews with Sufi practitioners and archival research, his book brings readers deep into the spiritual networks that persist beneath the surface of state-enforced Wahhabi orthodoxy. It traces a century of scholarly life in the Hijaz, follows transnational ties, especially those of the Ba-Alawi order, and uncovers stories of persecution, such as that of Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki. Timely and vivid, it also examines the profound religious shifts unfolding under the rule of Muhammad bin Salman. Without further ado, welcome Dr. Besnik Sinani. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I would lie if I didn't say that it is such an emotional event to be back at this very dear place. And as I was listening to Can Güzel Hoca doing the introduction, I was reminded of a very dear figure in my life, the late Sheikh Said al-Kahil, Qaddasallahu Sirrahu, the late Khatib of the Masjid of Khalid bin Walid in Homs, who has passed away. And before I left Jeddah, I went to meet him, and I told him of how concerned I was that I was leaving the presence of people like him. And he told me, he said, in our path, distance and furtherness is the same thing. And it is unbelievable to me, really, that I come to this place after 8 years, and I meet dear friends and mentors and teachers of mine, and it seems like we have departed only yesterday. And at least that's on my side, and I hope it is shared by many of you. So I'm extremely privileged to be here. And it is indeed a very emotional event for me. So I have had, and I will be very honest on this, I've had very serious doubts on whether I have done justice to this topic. Because this is not simply an academic, the attempt to ask certain academic questions. This has been a form of amana for me. And so one of the very first things that I mentioned in the beginning of the introduction is the encounter with a very dear sheikh of the Ba-Alawi order who unfortunately passed away in 2020 during the COVID epidemic. And so I was introduced to him in Mecca in the month of Sha'ban. And my host, who is a very dear teacher, Habib Ubaidullah Latas, told him that this man, he actually said this young man, I don't know what he was saying, that, I do manage to kind of belie my own age, but he said, this young man is writing a book on Sufism in Saudi Arabia. And so the Habib was a bit surprised, and then he said, make sure that you write true things in your book. And so one of the questions that I've tried to address is, how do you do that? How do you write true things about Sufi communities in Saudi Arabia or anywhere? And so I've had serious questions on whether I've managed to answer that question somehow. So I'll go through some pictures, and I'll try to share some reflections and try to bring you into my own experience of writing this book. So this book started as a project in 2016. And in 2016, I met a superb historian, a German historian of the Middle East, who ended up writing a book. She was writing at the time, she was doing research about a book on the history of Jeddah. And then, but she had written on the history of Hadramaut, Professor Ulrike Freitag, and she would become what we call in Germany my Dr. Mutter, literally my doctoral mother. And so from 2016 to 2018, I actually conducted what would be called a field work, but it wasn't field work. It was a lot of fun going to gatherings of beautiful people, singing a lot of nasheed, doing a lot of dhikr sessions, and eating a lot of late night kabsa. So I have to be fair, and I cannot really complain that field work was difficult. Actually, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. But then what had happened till 2015, 2016, this explosion of Sufi gatherings in Saudi Arabia was going to come to an end very soon. And so I tried to address also the reasons as to why that happened. Why between 1995, more or less, till 2015, there was this unannounced toleration of the Sufi presence, and really the opening of Sufi gatherings throughout the Hijaz, more in Jeddah and in Mecca, and for various reasons less in Medina, and we can perhaps touch on those reasons. And then it comes to an end. And so I lived also through that period when all the Sufi gatherings were actually shut down, and I tried to engage with also the reasons as to why that happened. Now, the first thing that happens when I used to tell people that I'm writing a dissertation on Sufism in Saudi Arabia in the contemporary world, people would ask the question, are there still Sufis in Saudi Arabia? And the reason why people who know anything about Sufism ask that question is because there is this well-known it is a perception, it is justified, that the religious establishment of Saudi Arabia has been self-identified through its opposition to Sufism. It is what in religious studies we call a counter-religion. It justified its claim of orthodoxy, right? And it's one of the big terms that I use in the book, through opposition to the late Ottoman religious culture, to the practices of veneration of the Prophet, ﷺ, peace be upon him, and the saints, and the spiritual life of what we call Sufi orders. And so what we call the Wahhabi establishment is not simply a group of scholars with certain beliefs. There has been opposition to Sufism throughout history, and actually, as I try to, one of the courses I teach in Tübingen is Introduction to Sufism, and as I mentioned to my students, quite often some of the harshest critics of Sufism have been the Sufis themselves. Actually, that inward critical has been a fundamental part of the Sufi tradition. But this is something else. The religious establishment of Saudi Arabia, what we call the Wahhabis, does not represent only a group of scholars with a certain dogma. It represents what I call here an orthodoxy. Now, orthodoxy is a very debated term in Islamic studies, because very reputable scholars have claimed that it is inappropriate to use the term orthodoxy when it comes to Islam, because Islam has not developed that relationship between church and state that gave birth, let's say, in Western Europe to what we call Christian orthodoxy. And so I do not attempt to argue with the people who have made that claim. My argument has been that in the case of Saudi Arabia, this relationship between state power and dogma actually happened, and the institution that represents the orthodoxy in the Saudi context is the Council of the Senior Scholars, the Hayat Kibar Ulama, people who were not only kind of holding certain beliefs, the dogma, what we call the Wahhabi dogma, but also they were endowed with state power to promote this dogma and to cancel or to penalize what they considered heresy or disbelief. And so I owe a lot to the work of an amazing anthropologist, Professor Talal Assad, who actually defined orthodoxy precisely in those terms. He said that orthodoxy is not just dogma, is dogma empowered through state institutions, and this empowerment enables dogma to become an orthodoxy and to punish or cancel or seek to correct what it considered deviance. And so the very concept of what we call Wahhabism has been self-identified through opposition to the Sufi tradition. And so then why in 1995 there is this opening that happens in Saudi Arabia? Well, that's because the peculiar political history of Saudi Arabia. And so what we know is that in the mid-1990s, there is a political resurgence of a movement called the Sahwa movement, and they challenge the religious credentials of the Saudi state. And for a state that claims its legitimacy on religious grounds, this challenge coming from the religious establishment, of course, is a very serious matter. And so one of the things that the late King Abdullah did is that he opened spaces for other alternative religious groups as a way of challenging the monopoly on religion that Wahhabi groups claimed. And so it is this space in which we see the emergence and the opening of these Sufi spaces. So what am I talking about, the Sufi spaces? So the picture to the far, to my right and to your left, that is the gathering of a Sayyid from Jeddah. And most of the Sufis that I encountered during my field work, they are Sayyids, meaning that they are descendants of the Prophet. So this dimension of the Ahl al-Bayt, this dimension of the descendants of the Prophet, is a very important component of the Hijazi spiritual life of the Sufi circles. And so that was a gathering that was taking place every Monday. So what was happening? What happens in a Sufi gathering in Jeddah, right? So we're reading from the Riyadh al-Salihin, a well-known collection of hadith collection of Imam al-Nawawi, a 14th century well-known Shafi scholar. And then we would read from the Shifa of Qadi Iyad, this very fundamental and classical work of Muslim prophetology. And then there will be Nasheed in the Ba'alawi tradition, which is this, and I'm going to say a few more words about the Ba'alawis, this movement, this scholarly movement that is present throughout the Indian Ocean, but it has its center in Hadramaut in southern Yemen. And here, closer to me, the picture here is only the beginning of a ceremony that would happen every Ramadan, and it would be, if you can imagine, like 5, 6, 7 basketball courts put together, and you build a tent on top of that, and this is in the house of a very prominent Jeddah family, and this is a celebration of the Bedriya, where the names of the martyrs of the Battle of Badr are recited ritually every middle of Ramadan. So then 2015, 2016, gatherings like this started emerging all over Hijaz. Right? So I remember the very first time that I was invited into a Mawlid gathering. And this is not, I mean, if we were to think like that Sufism has been marginalized throughout the history of Saudi Arabia, then something very different is happening at that time. And I remember, for those of you, and I know that we have some friends from Jeddah here, so if you tell people from Jeddah, where is the Tahliya Street, right? Tahliya Street is the place where you have the signature stores, where you have the best-known cafes and restaurants. So this is not some kind of underground event. This is in the house of a very prominent family, and the voice of the Munshideen is heard all over the neighborhood. And there are literally thousands of people kind of coming to this mansion in the middle of Jeddah, and you start wondering, what is happening here? How is this possible? What has changed in the country? And so I got into the business of trying to make sense of this change. How come the Saudi Arabia that we all have known as a place of marginalization of Sufism all of a sudden had become a place where a gathering like that would be possible? Now, a central figure, and unfortunately, and I just met here someone who told me that he had met him, and I never had the chance of meeting one of my great heroes of this story, is Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki. And he comes from this very prominent family of scholars in Mecca. Of course, he's a Sayyid, so he's a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and he passes away in 2004. Now, the reason why his story takes center stage in the story that I try to tell in this book is that in 1977, he had just returned from his studies in Al-Azhar. Before that, he has studied at various institutions in Libya before the revolution that overthrew the Sanusi monarchy. He had studied in Bombay. He had traveled all over the world, kind of carrying this tradition of traveling in search of knowledge in Morocco, North Africa. So he's literally gone and he's been searching for all the greatest scholars of the time. And so he returns to Mecca, to his hometown, and his father, the celebrated scholar, Alawi al-Maliki, passed away. And so at a very young age, barely 30 years old, with a doctorate from Al-Azhar in Hadith, which at the time I think is believed that he had been the youngest person to receive a doctorate from Al-Azhar, he receives this high position that had been held by his father, and before that by his grandfather and his great-grandfather, of actually having a designated chair in the Haram, in the sacred mosque in Mecca. And on top of that, he becomes a professor of hadith at Qura University, which at the time is still a mahad, is not a university, but it is to become one of the main seminaries in Saudi Arabia. And he becomes one of the founders of what we call the Muslim World League, which at that moment had just been founded. So he's a very prominent figure. And so this is 1977. And then in 1979, the entire region would change. And there are some major political events that happen. One of them is the siege of Mecca. Some of you might be familiar, when a group of Messianic, Salafi, zealots, they attack and they literally take over the Haram, the sanctuary, and they believe that one of their people is the awaited Mahdi, the Messianic figure awaited towards the end of time. And this shatters Saudi Arabia politically. Now, another thing that happens at this time is the Iranian Revolution, right? So, and this shatters the, and this brings a lot of tension to all the monarchies in the region. And the other major event is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, why are these related? And I don't want to talk about the politics of that time more than I should. But basically, it brings the need for the Saudi government to reaffirm its religious credentials and to re-articulate its religious legitimacy. And so it creates the conditions for empowering the Wahhabi establishment even more. And what do orthodoxies do when they are empowered? They start searching for deviants, because they need to correct people's faiths. And so they start looking for deviants, and one of the most prominent people around is Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki, because by that time he had published a number of books, not published in Saudi Arabia, they had been published in Egypt, but in his books he had already started to challenge the scholarly credentials of the Wahhabi claims. And so what happens, it starts from 1977, 1978, 1979, till the end of his life. there is a wide literature, polemical literature, back and forth. So there are books written against him, and there are books that he responds to the books that are written against him. So there is this cycle of rudud, radda ala, this book and that book. And so there is this explosion of polemical works. And what is interesting is that whereas in terms of the Wahhabi establishment, there is an entire corporate of scholars producing literature against this man, in a way, he is a one-man show. He faces this entire apparatus on his own. And so what happens in 1979, there is a lengthy fatwa. There is a lengthy fatwa of around 13 pages, signed by who's who in the religious establishment of Saudi Arabia, where they basically ask him to take back everything he has written in his books. And they give him 3 months to repent, and he has to declare his repentance openly on TV and make it public, and basically he refuses. And when he refuses, then he is put under house arrest. He is fired from his position at the university. He is banned from traveling. He is banned from appearing on media. And then eventually he faces death threats. And so King Fahd at the time, who had just kind of taken over after the passing of the late King Khalid, asks him to leave the country because this had become very serious. While he was still teaching in the Haram, there were groups of people attacking him, throwing shoes and sandals, so it had become a real crisis. So King Fahd actually asked him to leave the country. So for 3 months, he actually goes to Indonesia, which becomes very meaningful in later developments. And after 3 months, he comes back to the country at the invitation of King Fahd, and King Fahd appears with him on TV to declare that the royal family declares a protection, but he will not have a public life. And so what does he do from 1980, 1981, when he comes back, till the end of his life? He makes sure to write book after book refuting the claims of the Wahhabi establishment. So he never stopped. He actually wrote later in his memoirs, "I'm very happy that I was freed from the obligations at the university because it gave me the opportunity to write my books." And he wrote more than 50 books. Now, some of them you can find repetitive themes, and that's not uncommon in the Muslim scholarly tradition. But some of them are very original texts. And so especially Mafahim Yajib and Tusaha, concepts that need to be corrected, is this powerful text when he exposes his beliefs unapologetically. And so then it becomes a question of what is Muslim orthodoxy? What is a Muslim correct way of connecting with God, God's sovereignty, the status of the prophet? So these very important theological questions that are ingrained to the Muslim, to the Sufi practice, he actually starts articulating a theologically grounded argument that supports the Sufi practices. And so he leaves behind this wealth of literature. Now, as I said, in the mid-1990s, then the political conditions change, and so people like him are given, let me show this, the next picture. I love the picture there because it says, Markaz al-Amr bil-Maruf wa Nahy anil Munkar bil-Baqiya. Now, for those of you who've traveled to Medina, Baqiya is, of course, a cemetery, the well-known cemetery where well-known members of the Ahlul Bayt have been buried, and Sahabas, and so it's a very important place. However, there are these institutions who seek to correct practice and to correct, so that's their job, right? To tell people what they should do and not do. at the cemetery. And so I knew people who like would pass by this office and they'll tell me these people, they're in the business of correcting the dead too. But it gives you, and then you have the institutions. This is in Medina, so it shows that this, what we call the Wahhabi Orthodoxy, basically doesn't only has control of the religious spaces and where religion is taught, right? But also has the political power and force to actually correct what it considers orthodoxy. So this is a picture from when Sayyid al-Maliki still used to teach in Mecca, and you can see the crowds surrounding him. So he was a major figure at the time. Now, let's say a few words about what is at the heart of this kind of very heated debates, right? So I want to point a little bit at these two pictures. At the center is the well-known leading figure of what we call the Ba'alawi order. And the Ba'alawi order, as I said, is representative of mostly Sayyids, descendants of the Prophet. And the center is in Hadramaut in southern Yemen, but they have a historical presence throughout the Indian Ocean and, of course, in the Hijaz. Even if you go to the old city of Jeddah, even the names of the streets, the names of the souks are linked to well-known Hadrami families of Sayyids. And so at the center there is the leading figure of the Ba'alawi order, who is Habib Omar bin Hafid. And the genealogy and the story of the Ba'alawis is impressive in many ways, because what happens is that in this period of the 1960s and 1970s, of course, you also have the independence movements. And so southern Yemen actually is taken over politically by a communist regime. And literally they start the persecution of religious figures. And so many of them are forced to flee the country. So the father of Habib Omar bin Hafid, at the time, he is the mufti of Tarim in Hadramaut. And he leaves his son on a Friday before the Friday prayer. He was going to give the khutbah. He leaves his son in the mosque. And he has to go and report every day at the security apparatus. And on that particular day, he disappears and he never comes back, because not only he's assassinated, but his body disappears. So there is this, and there are very gruesome accounts of the persecution of the Sayyids and religious figures that I mentioned in the book. Then we don't have to go, but very, very harsh and gruesome kind of forms of punishment. And so, ironically, many people like him and other leading Ba'alawis actually flee to Saudi Arabia. So ironically, at this time when all this kind of, we have this Wahhabization in steroids in Saudi Arabia, at that very time, some of the leading Sufi scholars in the Muslim world actually moved to Saudi Arabia. And so this creates, paradoxically, the conditions for having a huge network of scholars who are based in the Hijaz. And so where on one hand we have this policy of persecution, on the other hand we have the creation of this huge network of Sufi scholarship in Saudi Arabia at the time. And this has been influential also, and I mentioned this briefly, even in giving shape to Islam in the West, because some of the major figures that would kind of give shape to Islam in the West, if you think of people like Shah Abdul Hakim Murad or Professor Timothy Winter, or people like Hamza Yusuf in California, or people like Omar Farooq Abdullah, he used to be in Chicago before moving to Africa. So this Western converts, actually, they become students of the Ba'alawi teachers in the Hijaz. And so we have this paradoxical development taking place at that time. And at the heart of the contestations here is, how do Muslims relate to the Prophet, ﷺ? And so it's interesting, because then the tomb of the Prophet becomes a place of contestation. And the very chapter in my book is actually titled the standing shrine. And the reason why I called it a standing shrine is because when Wahhabi troops entered in the Hijaz in 1924, one of the first things that they did is that they demolished the entire, all the domed structures in Mecca and Medina and throughout the Hijaz. However, the green dome over the resting place of the Prophet ﷺ, is not destroyed. And it's quite interesting because even Orientalists at the time, but also Al-Manar in Egypt, they reported this very interesting story that actually two soldiers, they climbed and they wanted to destroy the green dome, and they fell and they died. And so people got the message, we shouldn't do this. And so this is a surviving shrine. Whether it is true they survived, it's still, there's a huge literature that people saw it as this contested space. Because on one hand, you have this scholarly tradition of people like Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki and the tradition that he represents, or the Balawis, that they see this place as a centerpiece of barakah, of blessing on this earth. And then you have this other scholarly tradition that sees it as a potential place of idolatry. And so basically the heated contestations that happen at this year and during this year's, basically at this period, is trying to figure out the place that that the green dome, so to speak, and the resting place of the Prophet takes in Muslim imagination. And so one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning of the book is that towards 2015, 2016, there's even a debate that even appears in Western media. I think the first British newspaper to report it was The Independent, that there were still plans of how to remove the tomb of the Prophet from there. And of course, this is a major question of contestation. And of course, even the Saudi government at the time, they rushed to say that, no, this was a proposal of a lone individual. But we have a record of scholarly proposals that they have been asking for one way or another to isolate the tomb from the rest of the mosque and to demolish the green dome. So this is a debate that goes back at least, and it's documented at least since the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the founder of the Wahhabi movement. So this connection with the Prophet then is central, and how to make sense of of the relationship with the Prophet. Is the Prophet a historical figure of the past that some reformists actually they even compared it in a way that many Muslims find offensive, as a mailman who came, brought the message and left? Or is the Prophet a presence that resonates barakah, blessing, and spiritual guidance? So these traditions are kind of clashing in this context, in this political context at the time. And so this concern of maintaining the relationship with the Prophet, ﷺ, is actually the Muslim search for maintaining the relationship with the moment and the person of the revelation. And so one of the things that I try to do is I try to explore what are the technologies of maintaining that relationship, that connectivity with the Prophet, right? And so this is where the families of the Sayyids, right, they kind of become extremely important, because they offer a connection with the Prophet through their scholarly genealogy, but also literally through their bodies, because they are biological descendants of the Prophet. And so you see that the genealogies of connection, and in every scholarly house that you go, you will find, and they will tell you exactly of how they are connected to the Prophet through which descendant. And so this conception of lineage, this conception of genealogy, of scholarly and literally biological genealogy, becomes a central concern in this search for maintaining a graduation in spiritual terms. So that's why the symbolic so you have an entire culture built around this search for maintaining the connectivity with the Prophet. And so some of the major figures that, as I said, came from Hadramaut at that time. They kind of established this learning circles. To my far right, Habib Ahmed Marshall Haddad, who actually he becomes the teacher of many of the Western converts at the time, of people that I mentioned, like Hamza Yusuf and Timothy Winter and others. But the major figure of the Balawis at the time, at the center, he was based in Jeddah, is Abdul Qadir al-Sakaf. And then so they all kind of established these huge learning circles. And so informally, they created an entire madrasa. So even the time that I was there, you could, this is, by the way, Zain bin Sumayd, who is considered the main legal scholar at the time. And so they create an entire apparatus of learning. So even the time that I was there and I was trying to kind of be eager and attend all the gatherings I could, you could actually sense a sense of fatigue because actually you couldn't keep up because there was, Monday to Sunday, every day there was like a learning circle. So for people who wanted to actually attain a traditional, learning and scholarship, there were all these circles and that's what they were doing, right? And there were many of them in Mecca and in Jeddah. And so out of this community of exiled Hadramis, right, you have people who were born and were raised in Jeddah. So even someone like Habib Ali al-Jifri, who becomes, in the age of satellite television, he becomes well known, especially in places like Egypt. Actually, he is born and raised, and he is educated in this environment in Jeddah. Even the current head of the Balawi order, before he returns after the fall of communism in Yemen, he is educated in the Hijaz. So Hijaz, basically, this fortress of Wahhabi kind of dogma, becomes the place where some of the major figures of Sufism are educated. So I'll try to go a bit quickly because I'm actually more interested to hear. So this is an amazing picture, and I know it's not very high quality, but these are major figures of the Balawi order that were situated throughout the Indian Ocean, right? And the little boy there, who is standing next to his father was the one who was assassinated by the communists, was to become actually the head of the order later on. So this sense of genealogy, this sense of continuity, this sense of passing down scholarship becomes central to the Sufi life, to the Sufi communities. And I will pass through some of the so I point here is that where are the Sufi gatherings happening? And they're happening in coffee shops, and they're happening in backyards. And by that time, they're also happening, there are spaces given to TV channels, satellite TV channels, and radio stations. And so there is really an explosion. And then it comes to an halt. It stops. So briefly, why does it stop? Why does it stop with the current leaders of Saudi Arabia? And so my argument, very briefly, is that this is not a religious concern. So basically, they don't have strong religious views on what the Sufis teach, etc. But there is a tendency to centralize every aspect of life in Saudi Arabia. So that fragmentation that King Abdullah had sought to create in order to create alternative spaces and alternative kind of religious forms, with the coming of Mohammed bin Salman, he actually seeks to centralize every aspect of Saudi life, including religion. So then the alternative spaces in in private homes are not allowed to exist anymore. And so when, at the time, you might have followed on the news that people were surprised that we had this. So.
Thank you, Dr. Sinani. That was a wonderful lesson. I myself had absolutely no idea what's going on the part of that world. So what I want to know is, do Ba'alawis have a commentary tradition? I mean, they write commentaries, and what sort of literature do they read, except the Riyaz Salihin you have mentioned? For example, do they read Ibn Arabi or Ghazali or Jilani or whatsoever? And the third question, if I may, were the female students allowed to be trained there?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Those are wonderful questions. I'm very happy you asked that. So one of the first texts that I read that kind of gave me ideas when I was a graduate student doing my MA at NYU is I took a course with Professor Michael Gilson, who had conducted research himself. He had started his scholarly work in Hadramaut at the time. And so he assigned us a wonderful book written by an anthropologist named Eng Seng Ho. He used to be at Duke, and then he moved to Singapore. And so the title of the book is The Graves of Tarim. And Eng Seng Ho calls the Ba'alawis a textual community. And it's a textual community because people have been communicating throughout the Indian Ocean through text, even if they never met each other, and through different time periods because they've been reading the text of each other, even if they were written in different centuries, right? And so there is a lot of attempt to condense literature, meaning that how do you present condensed forms of the Ihya Ulumuddin? So if I were to mention like what are the main texts of the Ba'alawis, the Ihya Ulumuddin is there on the top. It is read actually in the madrasas of Tarim daily, starting at 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's a very rigorous program, and it is a very Ghazalian. So the Ba'alawis, they identify themselves, they identify their Sufism as outwardly Ghazalian and inwardly Shadili. So it's a very Ghazalian path. Now, the question of Ibn Arabi is very important because actually one of the main scholars who've dealt with the Ba'alawis is Professor Alexander Knish at the University of Michigan. And Professor Knish, he makes a very interesting comments because he says, yeah, they are Sufis, but they don't read Ibn Arabi, right? And so this is interesting because there are in Ba'alawi texts, there are, for example, commentaries that Sheikh so-and-so, he saw his son reading Ibn Arabi and he hit him in his hand and said, that's not for you. However, the argument, and I actually touch upon in the book, is that I have known Akbarian sheikhs who tell their students Ibn Arabi is not for you. And so that doesn't disqualify them. And Alexander Knish himself, he said that when he talked to Habib Omar, Habib Omar clearly showed that he was familiar, that he had read and he had studied, but he does not teach it, right? However, this idea of prescribing who is and who is not a Sufi based on whether they read and teach Ibn Arabi, that sounds a bit too prescriptive. So there is a lot of commentaries on Mawlids, on Ihya Ulumuddin. So they identify on top of their path as Ghazalian and Shadili. It's Ash'ari in creed and strictly Shafi in their normativity. So these are the three pillars of the Ba'alawis. I don't know if that answered your question
Yes.
somehow.
Only the female students
Oh yes, the
remained.
female students. That's very important. Thank you. So I was actually a bit nervous about that because I interviewed. So one of the things I was lucky that the wife of a friend of mine had attended the female circles when she lived in Jeddah. So she provided much of the information of the curriculum they use, of the activities they do. So definitely there are circles. I talked to some of the teachers that teach in the female circles too, but I did not interview myself female students who were students at the time. So I hope that some female scholar researcher can do that at the time. I felt that it wasn't really something that would be welcomed for me to kind of insist doing that. Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this lecture, Dr. Sinani. This was amazing. I have, I think, 2.5 questions myself as well. So you mentioned at the beginning that there was less of an opening for Sufi spaces, I guess, in Medina as compared to Mecca and Jeddah.
Yeah.
Could you please address that? And then the second question, this is the half question. Since you mentioned a number of Western figures that were educated sort of by the Ba'alawi scholars, just out of curiosity, was Malcolm X, for example, one of them? Would the timing have matched up for him to have access to them and vice versa? And then my actual bigger question is about your methodology, both in terms of like scholarly approach, I guess, who did you read, but also how did the interviews happen? You mentioned a little bit about access from various people who had visited, but like, what was your setting for conducting an interview, for example, if that was what you were doing, etc., and any other details you might give?
Thank you. Those are great questions. But just if I forget one of them, Yekta, please do tell me. So Malcolm X, that's an amazing question, and I think I know I should ask who's working on Malcolm X, but I have no idea, to be honest with you. But I should take note of that question, because that would be something, yeah. Habib Zain, he actually lived in Medina, and so I barely met him because there was a lot of pressure of not at the same time that in Jeddah you could meet, you could go to any gathering you wanted. In Medina was a lot restricted. Now that has to do with Medina not only being a smaller place, but being the place where the University of Medina is located. So then the politics of space are very different, right? So every time that I asked people the same people who had taken me to meet other Balawi teachers or other Sufi teachers, they always discouraged me because there was this idea that he had been under observation. There had been various attempts to actually get him kicked out of the country, and his history, by the way, is an amazing history. I might say a few words really quick, but Medina was always it was more restricted. So of course there were gatherings happening, and I've been to tons of mawlids and hadra sessions in Medina, but they were not regular. And it was like word of mouth, people that you knew very well. Otherwise, nothing compared to what was happening in Jeddah at the time, where it was really, common to have Sufi gatherings right and left. So Medina was always this kind of there was more pressure there. So there was only through the intervention of very prominent families from the Hijaz that he stayed in Saudi Arabia. Now in Medina, he had taken over what they called the Ribat of Jifri, because it was established by the Jifri family, another Sayyid family, and so it was like a Ribat, like a learning center. He had traveled from Indonesia. Like there are huge, and so if people are, especially if there are students of anthropology here, the work of Ismail Fajr Al-Attas on the Hadramis in Indonesia is an amazing work. He's an amazing scholar. So Indonesia is a great center of learning, and then he goes to Hadramaut because you have to go to Hadramaut because that's the spiritual center of the Sayyids. And then his teacher is the Mufti that was assassinated. So then he leaves and in a place that's Baida, which is on the border between northern and southern Yemen. And because it was a borderland, kind of the control of the communist regime was kind of less pronounced. And after that, he's invited to take over the Ribat in Medina. But then there are these huge restrictions that happen in Medina. Now, so I addressed Malcolm X, I addressed Medina. What was the other question? Methodology, thank you. So basically, the methodology again goes back to Talal Asad, and so the idea is to try to say this as simply as I can. This kind of combination of study of text and context. So kind of do what ethnographers, I guess, would do. You go and you attend and you see what's happening, and on the other hand, you kind of you go to many majalis basically, and at the same time you read this literature of Rudud and other texts that they are producing. Now, in terms of questions, right? People were less attempt to welcome less kind of structured interviews. Can we meet for an interview? And these are my questions. And it would be easier to kind of seek to have a conversation about things that are coming up. And so I think that it was more useful to kind of ask, certain teachers, certain sheikh. And sometimes it was actually useful to take note of the questions that other people are asking. But what we consider kind of structured interviews, yes, I did a couple of those. I guess that formality, in a way, it kind of blocked the flow of a conversation. So if you go with genuine, I'm curious to know such and such thing, right? Then that would be a bit easier as a form of building a conversation. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinani. Really, for me as well, I'm filled with emotions, but at the same time, we are not allowed to be proud, but very grateful, mashallah, to listen to you. At the same time, my question is related with the Mawlid gatherings. Would you please describe one of them, for example, what do they do during Mawlid gatherings? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, because actually I forgot to mention it when I showed that picture to the far right. So that is a moment in the recitation of the Mawlid of the standing, right? Now the standing is one of the most debated practices in the literature, because in the moment when is when it's kind of the Prophet is invited, marhaban, and so at that moment, there is this idea of a prophetic presence. And of course, this is hugely debated, right? What's the modality of that presence? And what does it mean to have a prophetic presence, right? And so Sayyid al-Maliki addressed this questions. He goes like, those who think that we believe that someone comes out of the grave and comes to the gathering of the Mawlid, they are ignorant fools and they don't understand what we're talking about, right? And so a dear friend of mine who was kind of a nasheed singer in Sufi gatherings, he used a beautiful metaphor that I find it very useful. He said, the light of the sun is everywhere on earth, and that's how the prophetic presence is all over the globe. So but they felt the need to address of what does it mean, the prophetic presence? What does it mean to evoke the prophetic presence, right? But so the Mawlid, there is the common, there is a number of nasheeds that are kind of chanted, and there are chants, and there is the actual recitation of the Mawlid text, of the Barzinji text, which is the most common one in the Meccan tradition. Which, by the way, I should say, we're not talking of Mawlid only about the Prophet. For example, the Mawlid of Khadija in the Meccan tradition is very, very important. The Meccans have a very strong affinity with Lady Khadija, and so they recite, especially in Ramadan, the Mawlid of Khadija. But basically, this moment of the standing, right, and the passing around of bukhur in order to bring, this beautiful scent in the gathering, and the passing of oud, of perfume. So in a way, kind of is a preparation of the space for the prophetic presence. And Marion Katz, who was one of my professors at New York University, she wrote a beautiful book on the practice of the Mawlid. And so she addresses some of these questions, and anyone who works on Mawlid, I can't recommend a better text than that. I mean, it's beautifully written and with a lot of insight. So I don't know if that answered. Yeah.
Are they offering some
So yes,
sort of-
there is tea, there is coffee, and there is mostly coffee, right? The Khaliji coffee, one of my addictions that I gathered, like oud and Arabian coffee. So definitely yes, there is, and then there is usually like a dinner afterwards. So there is that, and there are sweets and it's very interesting because often you see. The people who are involved with the khidmah, right, are actually the young children of the young sons of scholars. So it is actually that khidmah is an important part of the education, of the preparation of a future scholar. So that's an important part of the tradition. Yeah. And I think there's a question there. Yeah. No, thank you for being here. The celebration of the Prophet's birthday. Yeah, I have a PDF. I can send it to you. Yeah, please don't put that on YouTube. You know. Yes.
I'm very privileged to have attended this talk, and for me as well, it's been emotional. Only because this took me down memory lane. By the way, I'm the one from Jeddah that he was referring to at the beginning of the talk. And I did get to meet the Sayyid Muhammad Alawi, rahmatullah alayh, in Al-Badriya.
In Al-Badriya.
Yeah, it was in 1995 or 6, I guess. I was too young at that time. And I do remember a towering presence. And he read the nasheed of Al-Badriya, and we recited the names of the shuhada. And I will just share some anecdotes relating to some of the questions and your observations as well. We do host scholarly circles up until now, and we view it as a form of barakah to have these scholars in our houses. So these majalis are still active up until today, and we have mixed circles. Women do attend freely, sometimes in a segregated setting, other times we're just different formations, you know, like the masjid where the men are at the front and the women are at the back. Of course, I've been to the circle at the left at Sayyid Abdullah Fadak. Yes, in his Biyutat residence. Also, we did ask our scholars of the Ba'alawi Tariqa about Futuhat al-Makkiyah for Ibn Arabi, and their advice was always take from Ibn Arabi his suluk, but leave his futuhat to him. Take his suluk, you know, the wayfaring of Ibn Arabi, take it. But his futuhat, it's his futuhat. Leave it to him. So we always found them to be very wise people in giving the middle ground when it comes to such contested issues. And of course, I could also attest to the fact that they're deeply rooted in the Hijazi history and of Jeddah's history as well. As you said, in the old town of Al-Balad, we have the Ba'alawi cemetery, the Suq al-Alawi, which is the most active, vibrant souk where you can find all the incense and the Arabic gum and all that you seek over there. And one plug-in I would like to do is that if you have the app store on your phones, if you're using iPhones and if you're using Android, you can find the Ba'alawi app, which has all their prayers, all their celebrations of the festivities. And only 2-3 days ago, I received a notification that they've translated everything into Turkish now. So if anyone is interested, if you download the Ba'alawi app, you'll find all the prayers of these scholars available in Turkish, and they date back to centuries, up until the recent commentaries and prayers that are circulating at the moment.
Can you also tell us why this is called Jeddah?
Okay. Right. So Jeddah is commonly known amongst its residents as al-Rakha wa Shidda, the mother of hardship and ease. And the mother is not just a casual title. We believe that the mother of all humanity, Mother Eve, Hawa, is buried in Jeddah. And Jeddah in Arabic means grandmother. So that's why one of the etymologies of the name is that Hawa, the mother of all humanity, is buried in Jeddah. That's why we have the cemetery of Hawa right outside Al-Balad. And we used to have a tomb, obviously, a very long one, designating her burial site. And you can still find pictures of it online. If you Google, you'll find. Because I think in the 30s it was demolished. And there are talks, by the way, because I'm semi-involved with the Ministry of Culture, of rebuilding the tomb. So this is just an indication of how the religious, political culture is shifting, slowly but definitely, to new territories.
So really quick, what I wanted to say on that is, like, I'm aware that there are kind of festivities and celebrations and people get together on Mawlids as a learned tradition of having regular gatherings. Like, I mean, Sayyid Abdullah Fadak, as you know, is a different story, right? We'll leave it at that. But the rest, right? The learning practice of having weekly gatherings, that's what has been... And
definitely diminished.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But still active.
Yeah.
So I was in a gathering of Sayyid Ahmed Muhammad Alawi Malki just 2 months ago in Mecca, in his residence, and I saw all his Indonesi students there. And by the way, you know, he's a Maliki scholar, but he teaches them the Shafi'i fiqh. And he gives them ijaza in the Shafi'i fiqh, which is just something to amuse about.
And even those who are kind of lucky enough to be invited, for example, for an iftar, even the food is Indonesian food during the iftar in the And
also we still have our sessions weekly or semi. Mostly they are online now. We refer to the digital realm now to hold our sessions. And in one way or another, this expands even the number of attendees on a global level, not just in numbers, but also geographically speaking.
If I may, I would actually quote Habib Ali al-Jifri on that. I can't remember now the title of the book, but he speaks about this, and he says, which is very interesting about the digital age that we live in, that the digital kind of encounter is important, is useful, but it does not replace the actual physical presence. And so to me, I think that's an important aspect. And so the impossibility of having that physical presence. I will tell an anecdote that you remind me on this about the tomb of Hawa. In 2018, right when, so there's kind of this announcements in the media that movie theaters have been opened, which was a big deal at the time in Saudi Arabia, and women now are allowed to drive. So there is kind of a sense in establishment religious circles that they are losing ground. So if you take something, you need to give something. And what was given to them were two things. At that time, there was a video that appeared of some Turkish pilgrims in the cave of Hira in Mecca doing the Hadra. And so that was a beautiful example, because then the government acted and they shut down the visitations to the Hira cave, right? So then it's interesting. Oh, and the second thing is that there used to be a tree in Taif. Even the scholars I asked, they didn't believe that it carried any historical significance, and especially pilgrims from the Indian subcontinent would stop there believing that the Prophet had rested in that tree. And so that tree was bulldozed. And so it is a very interesting moment when the government, at the time of giving the signals of liberalization, at the same time it has to affirm its orthodox credentials. And so the orthodox credentials are affirmed in what way? Then you are closing the... So I even quote in my book the document that was given to the Umrah kind of companies, prohibited that they would lose their license and they would be penalized if they took pilgrims to Hira. And I remember I asked one of my teachers, my Alawi teachers at the time in Mecca, and I said, Sayyid, how is it possible that they're closing the Hira cave, and he said, "Don't worry, son. If it brings money to the government, they'll open it and they'll make it better." And it has happened. So I also wanted to mention the gathering of Sayyid Abdullah Fadak. It has like a mezzanine floor so there is like a presence of women, and they are also invited to read hadith when there is like the hadith of Riyadh al-Salihin, for example. So, but he is also accused of being a liberali, so he is like a liberal sheikh. So he is a dear teacher and someone who actually was more willing than others to engage with my stupid questions. So he gave a lot of time, and so I'm extremely grateful. I need to find a way to actually send my book for whatever it's worth.
If you want, I can take it with me. I'm traveling tomorrow. If you have
I have only one copy, but I have it for my dear friends. And I will tell a quick story that. So publishers are extremely, cheap, and they gave me only 6 copies of the book, and I was really upset with the Brill publishers. And then my doctoral supervisor, she sends me a PDF of my book, and she said, "Guess what? It came from Riyadh." And I said, "That's perfect. It's been pirated in the right places." So, but I will, I have your contact, and I'll mail you a copy, and I'll be very grateful if you can do that. Yeah.
One last anecdote to tie it to Istanbul.
Please, yeah.
The last caliph, Khalifa Abdul Majid al-Thani, the last Ottoman, he's buried in Al-Baqi' in Medina.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And with that, I conclude my
Thank you.
anecdotes.
Thank you. I just come closer.
Thank you.
So I have no questions, but some addings. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much. I'm enlightened with your explanations and through stories. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. I live distance. I could.
Maybe more than 10 years.
That's right.
So the sohbet is being completed.
So I just wanted to announce I have some of these gatherings, recordings, video in my archive. Is anybody interested? We could make a place or even a common lecture, special lecture some other time. So that's what I wanted to tell you, and thank you very much
again.
Thank you
so much. Thank you. If I could recommend, if you go online and search, and I don't know why it's not easily available, so you have to kind of move around online a little bit. There is a beautiful article that was published many years ago by Al Jazeera called "The Man Who Longs for Mecca," and it is about this well-known architect that was just mentioned, Sami Ankawi, and he did something amazing that when Mecca was being demolished, right, to open the way for this huge kind of project of these mega hotels and whatnot, he took whatever he could, like an old window, an old door, and he built his house in Mecca using those pieces. In Jeddah, yes, I'm sorry. So if you go and if you search "The Man Who Longs for Mecca," you see the beautiful pictures of his house that actually he used pieces of old Mecca to build it, and it's an amazing place. And also, if you'd be curious, I mean, his son is an amazing artist, and so Ahmed Ankawi produces is a modern artist, but he brings the Hijaz into his work, so it's amazing work. So thank you for bringing that. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please, yeah.
In one of your slides, there was like 4 pictures going this way. Yes.
Yeah.
Who is the person on the very left or to the right?
So it's the same person. So this is Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki when he is 10 years old. And so this is the different stages. This is right before he passed away. So I that's why I wanted to put like all pictures. And as you said earlier, and I've heard this from many people who knew him, that he had this towering figure. and this larger-than-life personality. But I wanted to kind of, it is impressive if you read the story of his life, because in a way he was kind of brought into this tradition where he was meant to carry that family heritage, right? And that's something peculiar about that. And so there is this criticism against the Hijazi families. With all love and respect, I consider myself half Hijazi, right? As some people call us Tarsh al-Bahr, right? So we get our share of that. So here is the thing, is that there were many great scholarly families in the Hijaz, but scholarship lost its prominence, sociologically speaking. And so the other great scholarly families did not send their children to become scholars. Very few of them. So if you see kind of all his teachers, very few among their children became great scholars. So in a way, he becomes the carrier of that Hijazi tradition, right? So I asked a very simple question to all his students and even to his son. When he wrote all these books, when he picked a fight basically with the establishment, facing the death penalty, we have it on various, the testimony of many people that the late Mufti of Saudi Arabia, Sheikh bin Baz, literally asked the king for his execution. So this is a very serious matter, right? So I asked a very simple question. Why did he do it, right? And they told me, and I got the same answer. He felt this responsibility to uphold this Hijazi heritage. If you, one of the questions I used to ask, what was his tariqah, right? And in Mecca, it became a point when having one single tariqah, the Badawis are a separate case, but for real Meccans, having a single tariqah, it became not central. So you're not identified with one tariqah. The tariqah is the Meccan tariqah. So he was Shadili primarily, as his son told me. He had the lineage through the Sanusi order. He had of course, from the Ba'alawis. So in a way, even the books of Awrad that he compiled, he brings together Awrad from very different turuq. So then in a way, to be part of this melting pot of turuq, as Hisham Helier calls it, it became the Meccan way. Well, he didn't call it Tariqa Muhammadiyya. They called it, many people would call it informally as Tariqa Ulama Mecca, or the Meccan Tariqa. And it was perceived as a melting pot of the different lineages, the different turuq that had been in one time or another in Mecca. Yeah.
Besnik Hocam, you have really provided us with new insights and shed light on aspects of the field that are often overlooked. So it was really a deeply rewarding opportunity for all of us, I think, to listen to you today. So please consider here, I mean the Institute, your home, as well as our journal. And please, let's stay in touch. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Elif Hoca, thank you. Jarkizan Hoca, thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for finding time and being here. yes, it sounds like a joke. There's been 8 years, but I never felt distant from this place. This has always been a home in my heart. So thank you once again for having me.
One more question, if you allow.
Sorry to interrupt, but I had a little and a bigger question. The little was, for how long did you stay in Jeddah or in Saudi Arabia? And the second question would be, why of all of countries he went to Indonesia, and why he went back after 3 months? Was it more religious, more politic reasons, or didn't he feel like any risks there going back? Thank you very much.
Yes, so really quick. I had gone, right after my MA, I went to Saudi Arabia because I decided I was tired of being a poor student, no discouragement there, and I got a job. But while I was there, then I came across these gatherings, and so I decided, hold on a second, I want to write something about this. And so I decided to quit my job at King Abdulaziz University and start this doctoral program, partly because of the invitation of my dear Dr. Mutter Ulrike Freitag. And so it helped the fact that I had been in Saudi Arabia earlier, and I had familiarity, and I had gotten to know people. Because field work, especially, I don't recommend anyone, people have contacted me and asked me, I did not seek like a researcher visa. So it kind of, my research was illegal. I don't advise anyone to do it, right? But so having this kind of prior familiarity with the place and having friends and having connections, it really helped. The actual kind of official field work was for like 1.5 years. Yeah.
He's trying to say, but I tell you, it's mostly the kapsa and the gamwa.
There's a lot of kapsa and a lot of nasheed and a lot of, yes. Yeah. And food for the soul. And even when I try to kind of say it's too late to have lamb at midnight, they'll tell me there's barakah in this food, and you can see the outcome of that in my weight. So I blame the Sufis for that. Yeah. So thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Merhabalar, burası tıp fakültemizin Profesör Doktor Sami Zan seksiyon salonu. Ben anatomi öğretim üyesi Profesör Doktor Yakup Tuna. Öğrencilerimize 2. sınıftan itibaren bu salonda diseksiyon yapmak üzere teorik bilgileri kadavra üzerinde pratik olarak uyguluyoruz. İsteyen öğrencilerimiz kendileri de diseksiyona katılabilir bizzat. Bu onlar için büyük bir şans, ileriye yönelik olarak. Halihazırda 3 tane kadavramız var, diseksiyon salonunda çıkarabildiğimiz öğrencilerimize yönelik. Yumuşak dokular sırası geldiği zaman bu salonda kadavra üzerinde yapıyoruz. Ondan öncesini vücudun temel yapısı olan iskelet sistemi için kemik ve eklemleri diğer yan salonumuzdaki diğer laboratuvarda yapıyoruz. Orasının adı da Profesör Doktor Nurettin Berkol Maket Laboratuvarı. Teorik derslerden sonra ilk aşamada maketler üzerinde, iskelet üzerinde kemik iskelet yapısı işleniyor.